Some big news whenever it comes to Ukraine. There was a major vote in the United States Senate last night, and with the Senate aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and other military appropriations failed with the majority vote. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. 49 to 51. Senate Republicans blocked the Democratic bill to fund Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and border security over their demands for tighter border restrictions. Bernie Sanders also voted no. Many now fear the aid package is stalled for good. So there's actually quite a lot to say about this, Krystal, because it illustrates two separate political dynamics. The Republicans all voted against this aid package because it provides aid to Ukraine but does not fulfill the border demands not only of Senate Republicans, but of the House of Representatives. And this is where I want to spend a little procedural time because it does show you how difficult it will ever be to get the Ukraine package through the House. Speaker Mike Johnson put out a letter where he said two things in criticism of the administration on Ukraine. Number one, you have to not yet provided us with a strategic path forward to what victory looks like, AKA you're just funding an endless war.
Fair.
So, yep, eminently fair. Number two, if we pass this $61 billion, the legislation, the border legislation that is attached to it, has to look like H.R. 2. H.R. 2 is a Republican bill that was passed earlier in this Congress, which is an absolute non-starter for basically any single Democratic lawmaker, because it not only includes major reforms to asylum and all that. Now, to be clear, I support H.R. 2, but I'm saying from a political perspective, it's never going to happen whenever it comes to the Democratic lawmakers. So a lot of the constituencies going on behind the House who are negotiating on the border, even if they do come to some sort of a deal, it has no backing in the House of Representatives, which shows the political future for this. Two, and this explains the Bernie Sanders vote, Sanders voted against the package because the Israel aid is not conditioned to Israel to make them comply with international humanitarian law. And I actually think that going on in the future could be a major impediment, because as growing calls for conditioning Israel aid and all that, it would make it only even more difficult to try and pass some sort of border pack or some sort of package through the House when you're packaging all of these together. This is a lesson too, by the way, on why maybe we shouldn't be bundling all these things together, but that's a whole other separate conversation.
Well, the original idea for why you put these things together is because the White House really wants the Ukraine aid, right? And they thought, okay, we can throw in this like border security sweetener to get the Republicans to come along. Now the Republicans are saying like, no, we don't, this border security thing, we don't even want to vote for. It's not good enough for us. So it blows up that rationale. Then there was another assumption that like, oh, everyone will vote for the Israel piece. And still overwhelmingly, like Bernie's the only one who's voting against it because the aid is not conditioned. But there has been even Joe Biden, expressing openness to the idea of conditioning aid. And you've had some mainline, run-of-the-mill Democratic senators saying the same thing. Chris Van Hollen just recently came out and said he thought aid should be conditioned. So even the Israel piece of this has now also become a little bit more fraught and caused at least Bernie Sanders to withhold his vote from this thing as well. So the original logic of putting all these things together has kind of already come apart. Every single piece of it is controversial. So it's hard to see at this point how they're able to reform and change it to make the whole thing, make this cake bake.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems that are happening for them. And at the same time, I mean, the situation in Ukraine is just crumbling. The political architecture of the Zelensky regime is falling apart before all of our eyes. He's at open war with his top military commander because that guy told the truth and said it was a stalemate.
Who, by the way, I did a little looking into the polling, is more popular, has higher favorability. Zelensky's still very popular from what we can tell from the polls, but this head commander guy is more popular, has more trust with the population.
And now the mayor of Kyiv, let's go and put this up there on the screen, is speaking out against Zelensky. This is absolutely shocking. And he did it also in a New York Post interview. He says Zelensky is turning Ukraine in an authoritarian state, just like Russia. This is Vitaly Klitschko. He's with a famous boxer and is very famous inside of Ukraine, very well revered, and was a previous opponent actually to Zelensky. But the mayor of Kyiv is obviously an incredibly important position inside of wartime Ukraine right now. It remains a city that's probably battered the most, by Russia, and it's their overall capital. And again, let me read the direct quote. At some point, we will no longer be any different from Russia, where everything depends on the whim of one man. There is currently only one independent institution, but enormous pressure is being exerted on it. Local self-government, he said. So he is obviously speaking out against the command and control of Zelensky, who's trying to tighten down, actually, on all of his opponents as the war starts to crumble underneath from him. And if you think about it too, his sole real purpose in this war was to be like a hype man and to basically, emotionally pressure the West to keep funding him. Well, if he stops being able to get the checks go, then what is his purpose as the head of Ukraine? This is exploding too, again, just to cover some more of the domestic politics inside there. Let's put this up there on the screen. They are now actually reporting, Krystal, that Poroshenko, who is one of Zelensky's major opponents and who, though, has been, kind of a quiet ally of his ever since the invasion, was blocked this week from leaving Ukraine. He had his passport confiscated and he was not allowed to leave the country, specifically because Poroshenko was set to meet with Hungarian President or Prime Minister Viktor Orban. They believe that Orban has been blocking EU military aid, and he's also been outspoken about allowing Ukraine into NATO. They call him pro-Russia. I think he's actually much more of a realist. But anyway, he is very dissonant from the way that the rest of the Eastern European nations speak. The sheer fact that he was meeting with him was enough for the Zelensky people to cancel it, to block him from leaving the country. That's not something that a person who's confident in their leadership does. So things really are beginning to fall apart for him. You have the aid that is now canceled. They continue, actually, just yesterday, some of his representatives were here in Washington. They went on Fox News. They said, we have no plan for negotiation, all of that. So we continue to fund much of their delusional dreams. But from a sheer military perspective, they are, they're on their last ropes. They've got an average age of 43, 600,000 so of their troops have fled. Hundreds of thousands of their men are either dead or maimed, permanently from the battlefield. And even if we were to provide them at this point with every military piece of equipment that we're asking for, they have had zero proven ability to properly employ Western-style tactics and equipment on the battlefield. That's really what came through in the key findings segment that we did earlier this week, is that their military leadership is incredibly incompetent and arrogant and does not listen to U.S. military advice. So there's so much going on here, Krystal, that I do not currently see a path for this Ukraine aid package. Now, I would never put it past them to not shoehorn this thing, for the rest of all eternity to try and keep getting some money flowing to Ukraine. But this $61 billion, I really don't see a political path forward to this, especially this year. And everybody I've spoken to on Capitol Hill will privately say the exact same thing.
Yeah, and just think of what a difference a year makes. Last year at this time, Zelensky was being declared Time Person of the Year. And you could not have said any of this publicly. Not in Ukraine, not here. Western outlets, New York Times was certainly not going to be writing it up and talking about it, et cetera. And it shows you there is a level of instability among the Ukrainian, like in the domestic political situation, that has been completely bubbling underneath the surface and has now completely exploded to the surface, given the state of affairs with the failures of or disappointments, I should say, at least, of the military campaign. And that was one of the things that this mayor was saying about Zelensky is he's lying about how well the conflict is going, about how the war is actually going. And, you can't do that when you're asking your men to sacrifice their lives on the front line.
Well, they're drafting them. They're drafting people who have serious medical conditions.
And banning them from leaving the country. And you're lying about how things are going on the front lines. And then you see, okay, the funding is starting to run out from your biggest backer, et cetera. It's a dire situation. It is a chaotic, unstable situation, and basically nothing would surprise me at this point in terms of Ukrainian domestic politics.
I'll say it here. This is speculation. I think that there is a very serious possibility that there is a coup against Zelensky, because you've got the serious, his chief military advisor, who he's not even speaking to. He's issuing orders to his troops around basically the equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's an insane thing. Like what a completely unstable military architecture. Now you've got his political opponents who are openly speaking out against him, calling him authoritarian. Remember, he's canceled elections, but he's like, well, it wouldn't accomplish anything or any of this. So, and if he is not able to politically deliver on aid from the United States, which is the sole thing that is keeping them going, he has no real purpose there at the top. So I think he's seriously overplayed his hand. I think his arrogance and the way that he conducted himself in the West and also really at home has set them up for serious reality check whenever this aid package doesn't pass. And it would not be surprising to me at all if is removed and you have a very, very different style of leadership come in, just being like, okay, it's time to cut a deal, or something even more horrible. Because don't forget, Russia is still waging war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
That has not ended. They're continuing to rein, and if anything, they're getting even better at it, holding their defensive positions and raining down these very cheap attack drones all over Kyiv and attacking their infrastructure as the winter goes on. So I think it's gonna be a cold, cold winter all across Ukraine as all of this sets in.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.